So GitLab grew to over 30 million users, built a global community of raving fans, and all despite a giant Octocat-shaped gorilla in the room. But how did GitLab build this movement? Well, this is the story of an unexpected underdog, a disastrous PR incident that actually ended really well. And stick around to the end of the video where I'll share the critical ingredients in the GitLab story that can 100% be applied to your business and your work. All right, so let's wind the clock back to the beginning when GitLab started out life on October the 8th, 2011, when Dmitri Zappa and Valeri Coff committed the first piece of GitLab code. Now, GitLab was trucking along nicely when Sid Sijbrandij, a Dutch Ruby nerd, was rather impressed with the quality of the GitLab project and code and posted about GitLab to Hacker News, where it quickly became a curiosity to developers around the world. Momentum started to build, so Sid and Dmitri created GitLab Enterprise Edition and incorporated into a company. But back then, in 2014, well, life wasn't all that easy. You see, GitHub was all anyone would talk about, with their insane waiting rooms and offices, their killer merch, and everyone was sharing links to their GitHub repos online at meetups and in conference slides. Competitors such as Bitbucket, Subversion, and Launchpad had a bloody good go of it, but it was a foregone conclusion. Git won. GitHub won. But GitLab had something else up its sleeve. You see, unlike GitHub, which was a proprietary software development platform sitting on top of the open source Git project, GitLab was an open source software development platform sitting on top of the open source Git project. This gave GitLab a distinctive edge because developers love open source, not just because they love open accessible code, but also because developers love being part of the community that builds that code together. Oh, and by the way, real quick, if you're new around here, my name is Jono, and I've helped hundreds of companies and thousands of people build engaging online and in-person communities with less hassle and better results. So in 2015, GitLab made a few important decisions. Firstly, they joined Y Combinator, an accelerator that's helped a ton of successful companies. That gave them clarity on how to build the business. And secondly, they raised $1.5 million in seed funding, and that gave them some mad dollar to get to work with. Now, not only did they focus their efforts on building GitLab itself, but they also focused on an initiative called conversational development, which was all about collaboration and integration across the software engineering lifecycle. This was a concept first introduced to the world in their GitLab Master Plan livestream, which also featured a kind of weird-looking British guy emceeing it. So, GitLab were doing three things that I found particularly interesting. Firstly, they were building often requested features from GitHub faster than GitHub. For example, GitHub introduced issues as an early feature, but kind of sat in their hands for years and didn't really evolve it very much. But GitLab were voracious in implementing issue improvements, forged in the pit of people moaning about how GitLab seemingly ignored their feature requests. Secondly, and as I mentioned earlier, GitLab were open source. Now, this was a big deal, not just for the open source fanboys and fangirls, but also for companies who wanted to test and integrate GitLab into their businesses. GitLab made it super easy and low risk to spin up a quick deployment, but bringing in GitHub was a much more arduous process. But now thirdly, with conversational development, they were shaping how people would build software, based upon the very principles of how GitLab were building GitLab. So there was a lot to like about what GitLab were doing, and speaking of likes, go and click that cheeky little like button on this video. It really helps the channel out a lot. Like, seriously. It helps a lot, so go click it. But GitLab were also making other genius chess moves too, because around this time, GitLab dug deep into building a thriving community of both users and GitLab contributors. They were building GitLab itself out in the open. They were showing up at meetups and conferences and hackathons. They were mentoring and supporting new developers. They were running their GitLab summits. They were creating collaborative documentation and much more. And with all of this, something was changing. You see, prior to this, the snarky members of the tech world kind of wrote GitLab off as a, quote, cheap GitHub knockoff, but people weren't making those jokes as much. And as we stepped into 2016, GitLab had millions of users and over 1,000 active code contributors to GitLab itself. Now, it's important to remember that around this time, companies were kind of struggling to figure out how to balance the expectations of their community members working in their open source projects and, well, the reality of, selling something and building an actual business that can stand on its own 2 feet. For many companies, as they grew, they tightened the screws on openness and slowly receded back from the public square. But GitLab did the opposite and leaned right into it like the filthy hippies that they are. And there's 2 examples that are particularly notable here. Firstly, unlike almost any company that I've ever seen anywhere, GitLab released their company handbook in its entirety online, back when they were just 10 employees. Now, this wasn't a sprinkling of boring public policy and trademark usage rules. it was a hefty 2,000 pages of how the GitLab machine worked, how they made decisions, and how they engaged with their community. And secondly, in 2017, GitLab had what can only be described as the coolest possible response to a disaster. So here's what happened. An engineer basically fat-fingered an update to GitLab, and the whole shebang went down. And instead of battening down the hatches and making some PR wonk tell people to go away, they opened up a public Google Doc and even a live YouTube stream and debugged and fixed the issue out in the open. Cue stunned reaction. I remember these moments myself vividly. I'd gotten to know Sid and the team in the early days of GitLab, and he'd actually asked me to go and run a team at GitLab, but I politely declined because I was in the midst of starting my own business, which I run to this day. And that was a really tough decision because I knew Sid and his team really had the right mindset, expertise, and discipline when it came to building a movement and balancing that movement with the reality of running a business. Watching them from the sidelines as they navigated those waters was kind of like watching a friend perform at a concert, a combination of awe, surprise, and pride. But before we get to the incredible conclusion of the GitLab story, if you want to build a thriving community of your own, you should absolutely check out our Community Leadership Core. We provide one-on-one coaching and accountability. It's tailored directly to you and your company, helping you to work faster and smarter and generate measurable community engagement and growth every single month. Check out the link down there where you can go and find out more. Okay, so back to the story, because in 2018 is where things really stepped up a notch at GitLab. Not only did they raise 100 million smackaroos in their Series D fundraise, giving them a valuation of $1.1 billion, which, by the way, made them the darling, mythical creature that gets VCs, founders, and card-carrying members of the Battery all gooey.
They were a unicorn!
But they also had grown to over 100,000 organizations using GitLab, and a contributor community spanning over 2,000 members. They even inked deals with Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure, getting all up close and personal in GitHub's business, specifically their enterprise business. And the train just kept rolling through in 2019, with GitLab raising another $268 million in Series E funding, leading their total fundraising to just shy of $500 million. But it was working. The product was great, developers were happy, the community was growing, and in 2021, GitLab IPO'd at $77 a share with a market cap of $11 billion, leading Sid's email inbox to then receive approximately 11 billion emails offering their congratulations. Now, look, the IPO is impressive, and the VCs, investors, GitLab team, and bean counters have every right to be proud. But I think GitLab's real magic was how they built two very different audiences very effectively. You see, one audience are developers who use GitLab to build their software. These people largely don't care about the nuts and bolts of the GitLab company or community. They couldn't care less about IPOs, investment rounds, and company politics. They just want a great platform they can use that integrates with all the services and workflows that they care about. GitLab did an amazing job here. Their early focus on CI/CD and other developer lifecycle components, and their rapid feature development based upon open and, at times, pretty blunt developer feedback made them a very compelling option for developers. And on the other side of the fence, GitHub, who have always had an amazing product, kind of took on some organizational heft as they rapidly grew. But GitLab always remained a lean, mean engineering machine. But the second audience that GitLab focused on was their contributor community, and they never ever compromised this relationship. You see, openness and transparency was always central to GitLab. For many companies, this ethos would erode as they struggled to build a business and scale up. But GitLab doubled down when others stepped back, and they generated relentless trust from their community members, making it easier to recruit great staff, and ultimately led to their significant success. So, what should you take away from the GitLab story to build a thriving fan base and community around your own business? Well, in my mind, there's 4 key things that we should pay attention to here. Firstly, get clear on who your audience is and how to serve them. Delivering value to your users and customers is table stakes. When your competitors get fat and bulky, focus on being lean and spry. The narrower the gap between what your customers and prospects want and what you can deliver, the more successful you'll be. You see, GitLab shipped quickly, which didn't just solve specific problems, but it created a confidence that GitLab was rapidly innovating where other companies kind of crawled along at a snail's pace. Secondly, default to open, not closed. As businesses grow, there is a tendency to limit the information stream outside the company, and crisis comms and legal people make this 1,000 times worse. Why? Because they're incentivized by risk prevention, not innovation and trying new things. So limit the scope of these people and fill your company with people who are not just maniacal about making your audience happy, but critically about shipping tangible results quickly. GitLab installed this ethos across not just their product and their handbook, but also how they reacted in the most challenging moments. Open, not closed. Now, thirdly, double down on authenticity. I live and work in Silicon Valley, and I love it here. But there's a playbook for how companies form here. When a bit of success and money flows, founders and teams tend to join the same circles, use the same language and tonality, wear the same clothes, eat at the same places. And the cost of this is often individuality and thinking outside of the box. GitLab bucked this trend with their product, with their community, and with their vision, building their movement on their terms. Don't feel like you have to fit in with everybody else. And finally, build your vision together with your customers and users. I have absolutely zero doubt that GitLab would not have been successful if it wasn't for them, one, being open source, and two, investing in and building a community of developers, docs writers, translators, and more. When you create a community that both delivers value for its members and where they can also play an active role in a movement that they're passionate about, it is amazing what can happen. GitLab struck the balance right. They treated their community as teammates, all marching together towards something everybody could get excited by. All right, so what's next? Well, if you want to build a thriving fan base and community around your own business, click this video up here to learn about 5 absolutely essential ingredients that are needed. In my 26 years of helping people build communities, if you don't have these ingredients, it's not going to work. So go and check out that video next.